Basically, I guess how we'll start. First off, I'm Chad Popwich. I work for Glencore Grain in the Netherlands, and our primary focus, I guess, is field peas, chickpeas, lentils, and various varieties of beans. I will start off and I guess give my market, current situation and outlook on Canada specifically. I guess looking at the old crop situation or the situation today, as most people know, there was a very big crop out of Canada this past year. Last year during seeding, everything was quite late. There was snow on the ground actually at this time last year. After that, the conditions actually were perfect. All the stars aligned, and ultimately there were record yields on all crops in Canada. For the most part, the peas had very good movement early in the crop year, from August until basically the end of October. With that, the rail issues and capacity issues out of Canada started to happen and really affect the peas specifically. The reason why it affected the peas specifically was more so the core demand of other commodities, the other commodities being wheat and canola primarily. Which basically took up the majority, if not all, of the terminal capacity in Canada. So peas kind of got left behind a little bit. In saying that, year over year, as we sit at the end of March, the exports out of Canada on peas are actually right on par with last year. So really, despite the last few months of minimal shipping, because the year started so early, we are actually doing quite well. For the most part, the values in Canada are very, very strong. The prices have rallied over the past few months, primarily on the demand from the Indian subcontinent. Obviously, India being the biggest driver behind that, but also with the help of Bangladesh. So basically, with that, you looked at the Canadian origin peas and they were the cheapest, compared to Black Sea, compared to French. Canada by far was the cheapest pea, and, earlier India didn't buy as much as they needed to, and hence had to come to Canada for procurement. As we head into new crop, I guess the forecast today is we are expecting a larger acreage this year out of Canada, total peas, yellows as well. At the moment, we are facing seeding delays once again. So comparing to last year, I would say it's not as bad. However, the forecast over the next 7 to 10 days continues to be quite wet and a little bit on the cool side. So a very small percentage of the crop has been seeded to date. Compared to last year, I guess we're doing okay. Compared to normal, things are behind. If we're having the same conversation within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I say that we could start to have an issue, and more so with maybe other alternatives being planted. The farmer may be looking at it being a little bit too late for pulses to seed, and starting to look for other alternatives, maybe wheat or something like that. But it's still a little bit early today, but I think that's something that we need to watch, the weather and crop alternatives going forward. What we know today, I guess with the expected production, we're looking just under 4 million tons of total peas. The majority of that, around 3.2, 3.3, being yellow peas. So that's our expectation today, if the crop was seeded today. Looking at the overall S&D and taking out everything around it, I guess you could look and say, 4 million tons of peas out of Canada is more than enough supply, I think, to satisfy the demand. There is core demand for Canadian peas, but similar to last year, I would say, to some degree, we can almost throw the S&D out the window. It almost becomes irrelevant because this year coming up, I firmly believe that terminal capacity and logistics will play a major role in the Canadian market once again. We see this happening already, where the new crop capacity into August through December period is already filling up quite quickly out of Canada, not necessarily with peas or pulses, but very strong demand for wheat and canola once again. And we even have canola buyers booking the first quarter of 2015. So we do see a very strong core demand once again. And with 25 million tons of carryout expected out of Canada, and even with an average crop, assuming that we have an average crop this coming up year, there is a lot of grain to move out of Canada again, hence why the railways, the logistics, and the terminal capacity are going to play a very key role in what happens with values in Canada once again on yellow peas. So that's just, I guess, a quick update on Canada. And as I mentioned, it is going to be fairly informal. I will not ask myself any questions on Canada, but if anyone on the panel does, feel free. But I'll hand it over to Jeff now, and he can explain a little bit about the U.S.
Thanks, Chad. Jeff Van Pevenage with Columbia Grain out of Great Falls, Montana. U.S. crop is very similar to the Canadian crop last year, where we had a late-seeded crop, but close to record yields for both the green peas and the yellow peas last year with just ideal summer weather, and had good harvest weather as well, so we had very nice quality with the exception of a few small pockets out in the Pacific Northwest. With that said, we've had as many rail logistic issues as the Canadians have had. One thing that's been kind of interesting to note, yesterday they were talking about the CP and the CN not having locomotives, but all those CP and CN locomotives are down on the Burlington Northern, actually, where they leased a bunch of them. But we still have a huge oil play going on in North Dakota, where, frankly, most of the peas are being grown as well. And that's really played with the logistics of moving our peas and lentils out this year. So we're looking to have a carry out this year of about 100 to 120,000 tons, where we normally would carry 15 to 20,000 tons maximum. So we have good stocks. One of the things that I've noted all year is that the green pea production wasn't near as big as what people thought it was, and that's really what the U.S. looks at in terms of exports, is the green pea production. And at this point in time, the green peas are actually almost all sold out from the United States for the second and third year in a row. But we do have large stocks of yellow peas. We're looking at increasing acreage in the United States this year about 7%. Somewhere up around 950,000 acres, and expecting production this year to be between 750 and 770,000 tons of peas, of which about 500 of that will be yellow peas, and 250,000 metric tons of that will be green peas this year. And that is could be the second largest pea crop we've had in history in the United States. We're also fighting some wet conditions in the Midwest, but we'll note that Montana is now over 50% seeded, well ahead of last year at this point in time, and North Dakota is actually right about where it was last year at 2% seeded. So really the conditions are close to where it was last year. The Pacific Northwest, out Washington, Idaho, which is primarily all whole green pea production, is down on the downhill slide right now with over 80% of the crop seeded out there. Weather conditions have been really quite nice, and it's quite wet everywhere. We do have a wet forecast. It's actually snowing in Great Falls right now today, so winter kind of persists as we go. One of the things that we're also going to see this year is a much larger acreage out of Nebraska and Colorado area, where we expect to see over 50,000 acres of just yellow peas. A lot of that production will end up into the domestic market, into the pet food market, as well as the USDA PL 480 markets this year. We've also seen a big drive for protein and fractionization of peas. Here about a week ago, there was a big article out in Bloomberg magazine where General Mills, Pillsbury, has found a lot of ways to start using it and make their products successful, and they have a strong drive on for pea flour. So you're seeing a lot more domestic use out of the crop in the United States. So, you know, if everything goes well at this point in time, we look to have a bigger crop, should have more commercially available for the world markets.
So, Jeff, just a question. With a larger pea crop, it isn't a concern at all with that feed demand then. So, you know, how much of the U.S. crop would have to move to India, or does it have to move to the Indian subcontinent, or is the domestic consumption big enough to take care of that extra production that's expected?
No, the domestic is growing, but it's still not enough. We'll still have to export somewhere around 200 to 250,000 tons apiece somewhere.
And is that an increase over this past year?
That would be an increase, yes.
Okay. And the carryout, so the 100 to 120,000 ton carryout would be ultimately all yellow peas?
Primarily all yellow peas.
Okay,
yes.
and is just if you can touch on the mentality of the farmer, maybe, you know, how is cash flow in the U.S. For the majority of the farmers, and what is their marketing intel, or you know, how do they act when it comes to yellow pea marketing? Is it something that they like to push to sell? Is it something that they can hold? And even maybe touch on storage in the U.S.
Yeah. The farmers in the U.S. really are in a pretty good cash flow situation, and they don't have to move them. You will see a big push at harvest time. There's a fair amount of them that just want to get them off, get them gone, bring them to town if anybody's got space. But we've seen a huge increase in storage production on the farm over the course of the last 4 to 5 years, so there's a lot of space. The United States is starting to see and use a lot of these grain bags like the Canadians have been using for years as well. So there's really not a storage problem at all for the crop. You'll note the wheat prices over the course of the last 2 to 3 months have continued to gradually climb higher. Durum prices have been climbing a little higher. And the farmer looks at that and he says, you know, I'm not going to sell my yellow peas for less than what I'm selling wheat. So he's going to continue to be a strong holder of those things until the market rallies. And the market's been in a downtrend here over the last 2 years for him, you know, where he was selling $9 and $10 peas a couple years ago, and today he's looking at $6 and $6.50 a bushel peas. He doesn't like that, and so he's a little bit slower marketing of those crops.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for the U.S. from the panel? No? Okay. I will bypass India for the time being, because we want to save him till the end. I will go to Emin now, and he will give a quick market recap and outlook on the Black Sea region.
Hello everybody, this is Emin from ILTA Agribusiness Dubai. I will be covering the Black Sea for yellow peas production. Contrary to Canada, Black Sea farmers are not growing yellow peas to export. So the basic consumption area of the Black Sea, yellow peas in Black Sea, I mean Ukraine and Russia, for domestic consumption, which is feed. That's why the yellow peas export appetite of the Black Sea countries depend on the protein complex of these countries, the relative price of the soybean meal or the related feed products. Although the yellow peas are grown in the ports interland, which are the south parts of the Ukraine and Russia, it's not 100% export-oriented products. The numbers are telling this as well. Russia is producing, not official, but the market data is producing something between 1.5 to 1.7 million tons of yellow peas. On the other hand, exporting only 300 to 500,000 tons, depending on the year. On the other hand, Ukraine is producing something between 300 to 500,000 tons. Again, the exportable quantity is between 150 to 200,000 tons. So these numbers are showing that these countries are not growing yellow peas for India. Its main reason is they are growing these for their own consumption. The exports are divided into 2 destinations as well. One is the European feed market, which is mainly the Mediterranean countries. The second is the India. The good quality peas are finding their way to India. Moving yellow peas from Black Sea to India has got 2 ways. One is the bulk vessels from Novosibirsk, in combined with the chickpeas mainly. And the second way of carrying these yellow peas to India is through the transshipment from Turkey, bulking containers. So we can, out of 300,000 tons exported from Russia, we can say half went to India Indian subcontinent, and half goes to Mediterranean countries as feed. This is the brief picture. For the new crop, there are a lot of answers. First of all, for the Black Sea, there is no issue of logistics, except winter ice, which is normal in anywhere else as well. Logistics is not the issue, but the political situations in Ukraine and Russia is affecting the new crop seeding. Because of the financial difficulties, the farmers are not able to plant. They are far behind their averages for seeding. This might, especially Ukraine, this might affect the output in Ukraine. In Russia, we expect the acreage more or less the same. But again, the export number totally depends on the currency, the domestic appetite of the feed producers, and of course the weather during the harvest.
Thanks. I got one question just about, I guess, the current year's production. I myself, we also are active in the Black Sea and Russia specifically. The crop, I guess, at the beginning of last year appeared to be very, very big in Russia. Estimates of about 1.9 to 2 million tons. There was a little bit exported to the Indian subcontinent early in the year, and then things really died off. As the new year turned, I personally was still expecting a lot of the Black Sea, specifically Russia peas, to come to the market. The farmer had to sell. There was a lot of, like I said, a big production and a lot of inventory, and then it just seemed like it disappeared. And you look at the updated production estimate, and it's gone from about 1.9 to 2 million tons to about 1.5 million tons. So is that all, is there disappearance somewhere else, or is that all the feed market domestically, or, was there a big percentage of the crop left in the field and it just goes to waste? I'm just wondering where that went.
I don't think it's left on the field, but first of all, the biggest problem is the reliability of the statistics. So this we cannot rely which numbers are correct. The second thing is, I think most of the output went to feed instead of going to, it didn't disappear. I didn't think it was the quality issue, or it didn't went to ports to be exported. Instead, it went to domestic consumption.
And for the carryout, estimates on carryout of yellow peas that have...
I estimate between 50 to 100,000 of exportable until beginning of July.
Okay.
Max.
Okay. Any other questions for Black Sea from anyone on the panel? No? Okay. Next, we will go to Australia, and Will.
Thanks, Chad. My name's William, and I work for Australian Grain Export, and we export pulses from Australia all over the world. So I'm going to go through very briefly just about the Australian crop and the Australian situation. First thing is, as with lentils, we're a tiny country compared to the production in Canada, so we're roughly 10% of what Canada produce. So we pretty much follow their lead, with pricing and other things. So what's happening in Canada is hugely important for what happens in Australia. Starting with last year, going into the 13-14 crop, we had a very small carryout from the year before, and our crop last year was I'd say of an average size, probably somewhere between 300 and 350,000 tons. Of that crop in Australia, most of the tons in Victoria and New South Wales don't actually come into the export market for whole Caspar field peas. So what it boiled down to was the fact that we pretty much had somewhere between 100 and 150,000 tons of exportable surplus of yellow peas last year from Australia. Demand has been very good from southern India in containers. They particularly like Caspar peas, so we've sold, there's been a lot of exports there. And also our feed market, a bit like Jeff mentioned, our domestic feed market has also been very active, buying a lot of field peas in South Australia. Again, because of the price of other grains, peas have become very attractive. So what it's meant is that our ending stocks this year will be minimal, same as last year. So I'd expect to have a very small carryout heading into new crop. The other thing is the farmer's ability, and again, my United States friend mentioned the same thing, that farmers now with peas, they're quite happy. In the old days, we used to buy peas at $200 a ton from the farmer. Now the minimum's more about $300, and they'll sit on peas at anything less than $300. So combine that with the good demand, then it means we'll have very few peas heading into our new crop. Looking at new crop, Pulse Australia are telling us that they're thinking around 240,000 hectares of peas to go in this year. Again, that's the majority is in Victoria and South Australia, with a smaller amount in Western Australia, and again some tons up in New South Wales. But with Australia, it's always too early. Right now, I'd predict probably a similar crop to last year, somewhere between 300,000 and 350,000 tons. But again, we've got the crop's not even in the ground, so same as what Mostyn said about chickpeas, lentils, everything in Australia. It's all just numbers at the moment. What actually occurs, who knows? We could have some good weather, some bad weather, and make a huge difference. Going forwards, I can see demand continuing for peas. They're good value. They will be related to what the Desi chickpea price, as we heard just before, so that'll be a key factor as to what happens to the yellow pea and field pea price, and also what's happening with Canadian logistics, how that pans out. Again, like I said, we're driven by what the yellow pea market is doing, and also the Desi chickpea market. If Desi chickpeas go up, then that'll increase demand for yellow peas and Casper peas. But yeah, I think the demand will stay strong, and with our lack of carryout, I think demand for Australian field peas will continue.
Either yourself or Mostyn, you mentioned it a little bit just on the weather aspect, but with seeding around the corner, how are current conditions? There was a lot of talk about drought over the past few months, very dry conditions. There has been some good rains, to my knowledge, over the past few weeks and even over the past month. How does it look today? What do you need going forward? And if you don't get what you're looking for going forward, how do you think that's going to affect the peas specifically?
The bad weather in Australia was more in the north. So the chickpea areas, which are up in New South Wales and Queensland, had a period of total dryness, and it was looking very bad until Mr. Wilson mentioned before. They did have some good rains in areas. I think some of it's still patchy, but that solved a bit of the problem on chickpeas. Down south in Victoria and South Australia, where more majority of field peas are grown, the weather's been okay, and it's not going to break any records, but it's been okay. So again, it's all down to if we get more rain, after seeding.
So no major concerns at this point.
Not on peas, no.
Okay, and just on the role of the domestic feed market, obviously it depends on other alternatives, but this year there was very strong demand. I know you mentioned it a little bit. Do you see that continuing going forward?
Yeah, I don't see why not. And again, it all depends on the prices of the other commodities. So if we continue to see wheat go up, or wheat around $300 like it is now, the growers will sell wheat or plant more wheat, plant less peas, and sit on their peas until later on.
Okay. And it was mentioned in a couple other panels, but just from an overall logistics standpoint, capacity, packing capacity, container availability, do you see any major concerns or issues along those lines out of Australia?
Not really at the moment. Some people do struggle with containers, depending on Adelaide or Melbourne. But we've had no problems, and I think it'll be fine. I mean, unless we had a crop of, for some reason, we had 500,000 tons of peas, or the lentil crop was massive or something, then there possibly could be a problem, but not as I see it. Also, we've had very few bulk vessels or no bulk vessels of peas go out. So if that changes, well, that'll take the pressure off the containers.
Mostyn, do you have anything to add, or?
Just a little bit further, I think, and we say it over and over again, but Australia's about the spring. So we can talk all we want about what's happening now, but we really need to see what happens later this year to give a further picture. But vis-a-vis, if everything is as per equal, we should see a similar crop to last year. But I think, similar to Desi, we have trained the grower with price to go towards wheat, barley, and canola, and away from peas. So it's just something, I guess, something to think of. You need to take that into consideration. That once again, as Will has alluded to, the grower is not going to be an active seller if he sees value in the wheat chain. And the marketability, the hedgeability of wheat versus peas, I think you're going to see those guys actively market wheat, especially as Will said, above 300 track. They're going to sell wheat all day. So that's just something for the buyers to take into account. But yeah, I think the logistics is once again an issue. I know Wills has mentioned that container availability is less of an issue, but I think we have seen this year massive exports of wheat, especially from Melbourne and barley, and that does put a strain on our export chain. One of the things to take into account as well is if we do see a lower Aussie, which will be good for export pricing, you are going to see lower imports into Australia in containers, and that might make that a little bit more difficult. So the bulk pathway may work there, and as Will said, there has only been one bulk shipment of a hatch of peas, which is unusual from Australia. So bulk could be the way to move forward. However, a proviso on that as well, that the bulk would be out of a South Australian bulk handling system, and if we have a good crop there, you're going to have to fight wheat, barley and canola to get elevation. So just a few things to take into account, but it's probably too early to tell now.
Thanks, Mawson. We'll now turn it over to India and more from a demand outlook. Anurag.
Thanks, Chad. Basically, India, as you all know, the total annual consumption in India for peas is about 1.8 million tons, out of which our crop size is generally 500 to 600,000 tons, and the balance is met by imports, predominantly from Canada and then from the Black Sea region and some from Australia as well. France has been out mostly for the last year and a half. We've not seen much of French peas coming in. This year also the crop size was, we harvest almost about 500 to 550,000 tons, of which approximately 20% of which was rain damaged. And the markets in India basically have been strong in yellow peas because of the logistical issues in Canada and lesser arrivals. And the lifting from the ports, especially in the month of February, was very, very good. And we saw almost about 150,000 tons of imported peas being lifted and delivered from all the major ports in India. And over the last 2 months, however, this lifting has really gone down significantly, and we have seen an average of about 50 to 70,000 tons being lifted in the months of March and April. The main reason for this has been the lower prices of chana, which I feel is the major reason, because historically we have seen yellow peas being at least 5 to 6,000 rupees a ton lower than the desi chickpea prices. Whereas this year, for the first time, we are seeing that yellow peas prices are being quoted above desi chickpeas. So of course, there is a lot of substitution taking place. Earlier, yellow peas used to be described as the poor man's desi chickpeas, but it's the other way around now. Because of probably very, very high, because of higher chickpea numbers this year, and because of lower prices of chickpeas, we are seeing that yellow peas now are being probably, the demand for yellow peas is now getting less. And basically until the new crop, that is until Canada starts shipping the new crop, I see the markets of yellow peas being stagnant, or maybe there is a downward tendency until we see the new crop peas coming into India. A lot of business also has been transacted for the new crop yellow peas, and I feel we need to see how the markets fare in the next couple of months. We need to watch it closely, because either the chickpea prices have to go up or the yellow peas prices have to come down. So this needs to be seen and watched carefully.
Okay, you answered most of my questions in that, but maybe, with that, do you have an opinion on the Indian rupee as well? Maybe an outlook and how that may or may not affect yellow peas specifically?
The Indian rupee, thankfully, has been hovering around the levels between 60 to 62, and I do not feel that there is much of volatility in it. We are expecting a new government at the center by the end of this month, and of course there'll be a lot of new policies and initiatives, and it still remains to be seen whether we'll be having a majority government or it'll be a hung parliament with a lot of coalition partners. But more or less, I do not think that the rupee is really going to weaken too much from this level. It should remain at these levels. This is my opinion.
A few years back, the PS used to be very active in the Indian market. for distribution in India. We haven't seen them for the past couple. Do we see them again? Is this something that they're focused on today, or have they completely exited the market and have no intention of running their programs going forward?
Basically, the PSUs, the three nodal corporations, were entrusted by the government of India to step in and import on behalf of the government when the local crops had failed and markets had gone ballistic. Just to rein in the price inflation of these products, the government had entrusted these three PSUs. Whatever they bought was not really for trading purposes, but the intention was to bring in and distribute these products through the public distribution system. And over the last 3 years or 4 years, we've not seen really any much scare in the local crop prices or the local crop production. So the government is, at the moment, they have no plans of really importing through these PSUs until we have some major crop problem.
And just back to the new crop demand, I guess. You mentioned that there has been a lot of business already completed for the new crop positions. Do you think everyone has bought? Do you think that there's still room for more? And maybe if you can put a number in your estimate of what you think has traded so far for the new crop position?
When I said a lot of new crop has been traded, I would rather like to rephrase it. I would say a lot of shipments are planned. Not all of them have been booked. Some business has happened, and rest, of course, will happen over the next few months. But then again, it will depend a lot on the logistics. And until Canada harvests the new crop, it is going to be a weather market. We need to see how much Canada really will be harvesting. But we do see a very, very high carryover stock at your end. I think almost 800,000 tons of carryover and close to 4 million tons of projected combined peas production for the new crop. So a lot remains to be seen about the pricing. I'm really not bullish on the new crop at this moment, but then again, there are many, many variable factors which could cause the prices to change at a later date.
I'll just comment briefly on sticking with Indian subcontinent and just touch briefly on Pakistan and Bangladesh. Obviously much smaller players in comparison to India, but Bangladesh will traditionally take around 250 to 300,000 tons of yellow peas in a year. To date, my forecast is they'll probably hit around 250,000 tons for the current year. When you look at new crop, they have bought nothing yet. They will need to buy. Now, again, it's just a matter of time. But that's one destination that has had very little activity on the new crop front. When you look at Pakistan, Pakistan has changed significantly over the past few years when it comes, in terms of Canadian peas. Not that they were large by any means, but I guess, looking 5 years ago, Canada would traditionally export 75 to 100,000 tons of peas to Pakistan. Over the past 2 years, the number's been relatively zero. And, it looks like they have become more price sensitive and are just really going hand to mouth with container shipments primarily out of the Black Sea region. So just a couple comments on that. Another destination, just on the topic of demand, that I wanted to touch on briefly was China. 5 to 7 years ago, China would import around 250,000 tons of peas from Canada. The current year that we're in, they're going to be importing around 800,000 tons. So the demand from China has increased significantly over the past 7 years. It is chasing India for imports, for the biggest number of imports from Canada. So they are a close second today. Just a little bit about the Chinese situation. They bought a lot of peas early in the crop year. Some of those peas still sit in stocks today. There's roughly 200,000 tons of yellow pea stocks sitting in the Chinese ports today. They've been a very quiet buyer over the past few months, and in my personal opinion, I believe that the exports out of Canada to China for the balance of the old crop will be very, very small. And then looking at new crop, they will need to buy. That's a position that they're going to be coming in for, and to date, they've bought very little. So I just think between Bangladesh and China, in comparison to India, they don't have very much on the books yet for new crop, and they're more so in a waiting game, which is a little bit different than last year when it comes to China anyways, where they were the first one out of the gate and bought a lot very, very early. Other than that, I guess really that takes care of the origins and destinations that we have presented on the panel today. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any specific questions. We'll do a little bit of a price forecast, maybe after, if there's any questions from the audience at all.
In terms of bulk shipments, will there have been as many bulk shipments for the 2013 crop out of Canada as there have been in previous years? And what's your forecast for the next crop year? You had mentioned earlier that logistic and elevation capacity was getting booked up. And in terms of the Chinese who haven't bought yet, will there be any capacity available for them to buy if they wanted to buy in the fall? And to a lesser extent, I'd like to direct the same question also to Jeff.
Okay, I guess year over year, as of March data, the bulk exports are approximately the same. So as I mentioned, it was front end loaded, and the logistics issue, I guess, wasn't there early in the crop year, and it more became a problem November onward. So you know what, from an export standpoint, bulk shipments, I think it will end up around the same. For the most part, the trade does know what is planned over the next few months, and the export number should be approximately the same compared to last year. So even despite the logistical issues and terminal capacity issues this past year, it's okay. I think what it did affect is the timing, obviously, and more so the containers. Especially through the NOV through I guess you could say March timeframe. Going forward, it really depends on the company. The companies or the suppliers in Canada do have the flexibility to handle the commodity in which they choose. When you look at peas specifically, it is a little bit of a specialty commodity. It takes a little bit more finesse to handle through facilities. You lose a little bit of efficiencies through the terminal. I'm just comparing to something like wheat or canola. So you know what, I think it will have its place coming up in the next year for bulk shipments. But what I do see, if the demand profile continues on wheat and canola, I think that there is a chance that there could be less bulk shipments out of Canada on peas. And in saying that, even some of that displacement could be in the form of red lentils, let's say. So it's not necessarily peas in place of canola or wheat, but it could be peas in place of something else like red lentils.
Bulk shipments out of the U.S. this year were up. There was probably over 100,000 tons of bulk vessel shipments out of the U.S. in the past year. I suspect next year it'll go up maybe double of what it was. We actually have good fobbing capacity in the U.S. You're going to see available capacity in August and September. October is usually always fully booked with soybean capacity, but you'll come back with December and through the first part of January, February, March into 2015 with good fobbing capacity in the U.S. We've had a huge expansion in capacity on the West Coast for loading vessels, so I suspect we'll have capacity available, and I suspect you'll probably see some Canadian peas fob out of the U.S. as well.
Hi, my name is Ikram. I'm from Al Ghurair Group in Dubai. I have a quick question to Jeff. You mentioned that exports loading from the Pacific Northwest could double this year for yellow peas. Is there any quality issues or differences between Canadian yellow peas and the American yellow peas?
No, they're really growing pretty close to the same regions. So, unless you have some specific weather in the U.S. or it's specific weather in Canada, they're really fairly similar products. U.S. probably doesn't clean as much as the Canadians do, but we've kind of found that the peas are pretty clean coming right off the combine.
Hi, Chad. Myself, Baldev from Ruchi Worldwide Limited, Mumbai. Chad, do you have any figures what numbers has been shipped, maybe shipped from April onwards to September, October for the old crop? Do you have any numbers? How many quantity will be going to ship?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can, a rough calculation. Do you mean to India specifically or just in general?
Indian specifically. I mean, I don't
Indian-
know.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to gauge. You know, doing the quick math from April until the end, I would say probably in the neighborhood of, 300,000 tons, give or take. The tough part, Baldev, is what is going to be going to Bangladesh versus India, and obviously there's China in there as well, which is going to be taking some. But I'd say somewhere in the ballpark of 250 to 300,000 tons could be for Indian ports in that time frame.
And what about for new crop has been traded for September, October, November? Just roughly figure, do you know about how many the business has been traded?
Well, I asked the same question to Anurag, I guess, of what his thoughts were, but I don't know. If Vijay from AgriCorp was up here, I bet you he'd be able to answer that a little bit better. But I don't know. To India, maybe 100,000 tons of new crop. That's my guess. I guess I'll fire it back to you. You're a buyer. What do you think?
Oh, yes, thank you. But at the moment, I don't think so. We will buy September, October shipment at the moment very earliest. Because, we have to ship the Russian and Ukraine cargo, what quantity we coming here from. And even too early say anything, at least we have to wait and watch. But in case price will come out $375, $370 for the September, October, definitely we will take much interest.
But in your estimate today, what do you
Yeah.
think the trade has bought for new crop?
Yes, 370 we bought something.
Oh, 300,000 tons?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
No. You are talking about the price.
Price,
He's
price.
asking you the quantity.
Yeah,
What is your
quantity.
estimate of the quantity that trade would have bought in India for the new crop?
I don't have any figure also. What
Okay.
quantity bought.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, it looks like we're getting the clink of the glass here. Gotcha.
Peter?
5 minutes, okay.
No, Peter.
Oh, another question, sorry.
Just a question to the panel to sort of flesh out a little bit more the risks to the grain market, or the broader grain market, of escalation in the Black Sea. We read today that military recruits are signing up quite heavily throughout Ukraine at the present time and doing all of getting their medicals. There's an expectation, or certainly the speculation is, of further activity in that Black Sea region with Russia further incursion into Ukraine. Let's just talk a little bit about the impacts that might have on the global grain market.
I think impacts of these moves will be beyond pulses. It will be more affecting the other major crops like wheat and the oilseeds. Unfortunately, nobody knows where the Russians are going to stop. So are they going to stop at the western provinces of the Ukraine, or are they going to continue until the southern ports like Odessa and Yuzhny? So where are the limits? But the second thing is, what will be the reaction to these behaviors of the Russian government? Then what will be the scope of sanctions? For example, in 6 months, are we going to have another Iran? Who can dare that? The major resources exporter of the world is heavily sanctioned, and all the oligarchs investing their money in London. So it is much complicated than the other sanction cases, but nobody knows where the Russians will go, what are their limits, and what are the limits of the West, I mean the US and Europe. But if you ask my opinion, Crimea is already annexed to Russia, and it will continue with the other western Ukrainian cities like Donetsk, Slavansk, and Kharkiv. This is my worst case scenario. If the Russian government goes beyond that, I think this means Third World War. Nobody will allow for that. And it already priced for grains. Look at the movements of the wheat in Chicago, and also all the crops are, especially the wheat, because everybody is betting that there will be disruptions from the shipments from Black Sea due to sanctions, due to financial issues, and the instability in the region. and it will affect.
Okay, any other questions? I think we're almost out of time. Just quickly across the panel, if you can give your expectation of price estimates for I guess yellow peas at your origin trading into India on a CFR basis, an expected range in your opinion.
I think as per the China, as we said before, if we see Desi China rally and strengthen, then, and especially if we see this issue with the Ukraine holding wheat prices artificially high, you're not going to see peas come out of Australia at levels like we saw earlier this year. So, I'm fairly supportive, but once again, from a pricing perspective, it's all about following Canada. So, if we see excellent supply out of Canada and subdued buyer behaviour, then you're probably going to see subdued pricing from Australia.
Chad, I think if Canada's logistics issues go away and all the crops go through nicely, then the S&D says that it should be an oversupply, so I'd say the price should come down, maybe $4.25 CFR in containers. But yeah, that's what I think.
A lot of variables in that case. Maybe now we are talking about July, August shipments from Black Sea. Maybe then we will be talking about force majeure. So it's very difficult to comment. And again, the weather during the harvest, again, difficult to comment on. But my estimate, looking at the other crops, like wheat out of Russia, I don't think the Black Sea yellow peas will not be traded lower than 400. It all depends, a lot of factors, of course, may change that.
I'm a pretty firm believer that we're going to continue to see logistical and transportation issues through at least the first 6 months of the next marketing year. Right now in the United States, in order to obtain rail freight, just to obtain rail freight, we're having to pay about $15 per metric ton over tariff just to get the service. So I think you're going to see, in order for peas to grab the fobbing capacity, the margins are going to have to be good enough that we would obtain somewhere in the neighborhood of 410 to 425 India.
From a logistical issue standpoint, as I mentioned before, I agree with Jeff on Canada. A rough estimate, there always could be a little bit of downside. Again, to Eamon's comment, there's so many variables that could change. But to give it a range, I would say, maybe on the low side, 385 into India, and upwards of 450 as we go through the year. So that's my wide range.
As regards Indian market is concerned, generally we are seeing offers for the new crop from Canada around levels 400 to 405 bulk shipment basis. At these levels, buyers are a bit skeptical because some business has been done initially by them. And as I said, as everyone has said, a lot of variables are there in the market. If the chickpea prices rally upwards, then definitely there'll be a renewed interest in yellow peas, and we'll see maybe equations change over the next few months.
Okay, thank you.